Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Log Talk Radio.
Coming at you live from the beautiful heartland of these good old United States of America, right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. This is the Rant. I am your host, Charles Lamson. I'll be with you for the next 2 hours as I am. I'm starting to slide back into the old show intro. I used to always say every Monday through Friday, 2 to 4 Central, but that not be the case anymore. All right. What's going on, everybody? It's July 10th, Wednesday, year of our Lord, 2019. Today's topic is the 10th part of Planning Page, Economics and Personal Finance. If you're wondering why I always play the creepy Tibetan bull music at the beginning of the show, it's because I am a great dark mystical spiritual necromancer, a channeler of the dead for the good of mankind, though. That's right, I'm very Machiavellian in that respect. The ends justify the means, right? Because, right, I'm looking for solutions. Times of great political and economic uncertainty and turmoil. So today we're going to be, once again, this is part 10 of this little series of shows. Once again, we're going to summon the spirit of a dead guy. Pretty knowledgeable, pretty well respected in the field of economics. And that's right, I'm talking about Alfred Marshall. We're going to get his spirit on the horn, as it were. We're going to get him to cross the veil through another great, talented medium. And he's going to talk about his principles of economics with us. That's the first half. Then the second half, also in the first half, I'm going to be doing Cripple-Guy Fitness Instructional video at the same time as we listen to Alfred Marshall's Principles of Economics. Today, I'm feeling pretty sluggish. I had a big meal. You know, you're not supposed to do this, but I had a big, fat, juicy cheeseburger, like right beforehand. Already feeling just a little tired, sluggish, afternoon. So my workout strategy was just to get a really lightweight, it's like a 10-pound therapeutic bar. And I don't know, going to mix it up a little bit, might do some supersets, whatever. My main intention, though, is just to kind of keep moving and going for about 45 to 50 minutes. Resting in between sets I count my respirations up to 30, so that's about 60 seconds in between sets, and just keep it going for 45, 50 minutes. Counting the respirations is also sort of a good way to, practice the art of moving zazen, as it were. Plus, we're listening to Alfred Marshall at the same time, Principles of Economics. the blood is flowing to the brain, and it's everything is just all working synergistically to create. It's one great big whole body, whole chakra cleansing workout, ladies and gentlemen. So then, after that first half of the show, I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about personal financial planning in right now in contemporary America. So tell your friends, tell your family. You won't want to miss a single second of today's big show. So right now, we're going to try and call forth the spirit of Alfred Marshall. Alfred, are you there? Please. Oh, shoot. Help us, brother. Guide us. Teach us. Share with us your infinite knowledge of economics. Oh, come on.
Can you guess what this means?
Hey, wait a minute. You're not
This
Alfred
right here
Marshall.
is the secret to
Who the
successful
hell are
investing.
you?
It's a pattern. And it's secret
Okay,
to
ladies and gentlemen, sometimes you get some interference in these seances.
much good mixed with the evil in its influences on material comfort and even social progress. End of footnote. On the whole, it seems proved that the birth rate is generally lower among the well-to-do than among those who make little expensive provision for the future of themselves and their families, and who live an active life, and that fecundity is diminished by luxurious habits of living. Probably it is also diminished by severe mental strain, that is to say, given the natural strength of the parents, their expectation of a large family is diminished by a great increase of mental strain. Of course, those who do high mental work have, as a class, more than the average of constitutional and nervous strength, and Galton has shown that they are not, as a class, unprolific. But they commonly marry late. Section 6. The growth of population in England has a more clearly defined history than that in the United Kingdom, and we shall find some interest in noticing its chief movements. The restraints on the increase of numbers during the Middle Ages were the same in England as elsewhere. In England, as elsewhere, the religious orders were a refuge to those for whom no establishment in marriage could be provided, and religious celibacy, while undoubtedly acting in some measure as an independent check on the growth of population, is in the main to be regarded rather as a method in which the broad natural forces tending to restrain population express themselves, than as an addition to them. Infectious and contagious diseases, both endemic and epidemic, were caused by dirty habits of life, which were even worse in England than in the south of Europe, and famines by the failures of good harvests and the difficulties of communication, though this evil was less in England than elsewhere. Country life was, as elsewhere, rigid in its habits. Young people found it difficult to establish themselves until some other married pair had passed from the scene and made a vacancy in their own parish, for migration to another parish was seldom thought of by an agricultural labourer under ordinary circumstances. Consequently, whenever plague or war or famine thinned the population, there were always many waiting to be married, who filled the vacant places, and, being perhaps younger and stronger than the average of newly married couples, had larger families. Footnote. Thus we are told that after the Black Death of 1349, most marriages were very fertile. End of footnote. There was, however, some movement even of agricultural labourers towards districts which had been struck more heavily than their neighbours by pestilence, by famine, or the sword. Moreover, artisans were often more or less on the move, and this was especially the case with those who were engaged in the building trades, and those who worked in metal and wood, though no doubt the wander years were chiefly those of youth, and after these were over, the wanderer was likely to settle down in the place in which he was born. Again, there seems to have been a good deal of migration on the part of the retainers of the landed gentry, especially of the greater barons who had seats in several parts of the country. And lastly, in spite of the selfish exclusiveness which the guilds developed as years went on, the towns offered in England, as elsewhere, a refuge to many who could get no good openings for work and for marriage in their own homes. In these various ways, some elasticity was introduced into the rigid system of medieval economy, and population was able to avail itself in some measure of the increased demand for labour which came gradually with the growth of knowledge, the establishment of law and order, and the development of oceanic trade. Footnote. There is no certain knowledge to be had as to the density of population in England before the 18th century, but the following estimates, reproduced from Steffen, Geschichte der englischen Lohnarbeiter, are probably the best as yet available. Domesday Book suggests that in 1086 the population of England was between 2 and 2.5 millions. Just before the Black Death in 1348, it may have been between 3.5 and 4.5 millions, and just afterwards 2.5 millions. It began to recover quickly, but made slow progress between 1400 and 1550. It increased rather fast in the next 100 years and reached 5.5 millions in 1700. If we are to trust Harrison in Description of England, Book 2, Chapter 16, the muster of men able for service in 1574 amounted to 1,172,674. The Black Death was England's one very great calamity. She was not, like the rest of Europe, liable to devastating wars, such as the 30 Years' War, which destroyed more than half the population of Germany, a loss which it required a full century to recover. End of footnote. In the latter half of the 17th and the first half of the 18th century, the central government exerted itself to hinder the adjustment of the supply of population in different parts of the country to the demand for it by settlement laws, which made anyone chargeable to a parish who had resided there 40 days, but ordered that he might be sent home by force at any time within that period. Footnote. Adam Smith is justly indignant at this. The Act recites that, by reason of some defects in the law, poor people are not restrained from going from one parish to another, and thereby do endeavour to settle themselves in those parishes where there is the best stock, the largest wastes or commons to build cottages, and the most woods for them to burn and destroy, etc. And it is therefore ordered that, upon complaint made, within 40 days after any such person or persons coming, so as to settle as foresaid, in any tenement under the yearly value of £10, it shall be lawful for any 2 justices of the peace to remove and convey such person or persons to such parish where he or they were last legally settled. Several acts purporting to soften its harshness had been passed before Adam Smith's time, but they had been ineffective. In 1795, however, it was ordered that no one should be removed until he became actually chargeable. End of footnote. Landlords and farmers were so eager to prevent people from getting a settlement in their parish that they put great difficulties in the way of building cottages, and sometimes even razed them to the ground. In consequence, the agricultural population of England was stationary during the 100 years ending with 1760, while the manufactures were not yet sufficiently developed to absorb large numbers. This retardation in the growth of numbers was partly caused by, and partly a cause of, a rise in the standard of living, a chief element of which was an increased use of wheat in the place of inferior grains as the food of the common people. Footnote. Some interesting remarks on this subject are made by Eden in The History of the Poor, Book 1, pages 560 to 64. End of footnote. From 1760 onwards, those who could not establish themselves at home found little difficulty in getting employment in the new manufacturing or mining districts, where the demand for workers often kept the local authorities from enforcing the removal clauses of the Settlement Act. To these districts, young people resorted freely, and the birth rate in them became exceptionally high, but so did the death rate also, the net result being a fairly rapid growth of population. At the end of the century, when Malthus wrote, the Poor Laws again began to influence the age of marriage, but this time in the direction of making it unduly early. The sufferings of the working classes caused by a series of famines and by the French War made some measure of relief necessary, and the need of large bodies of recruits for the army and navy was an additional inducement to tender-hearted people to be somewhat liberal in their allowances to a large family, with the practical effect of making the father of many children often able to procure more indulgences for himself without working than he could have got by hard work if he had been unmarried or had only a small family. Those who availed themselves most of this bounty were naturally the laziest and meanest of the people, those with the least self-respect and enterprise. So, although there was in the manufacturing towns a fearful mortality, particularly of infants, the quantity of the people increased fast, but its quality improved little, if at all, till the passing of the new Poor Law in 1834. Since that time, the rapid growth of the town population has, as we shall see in the next chapter, tended to increase mortality. But this has been counteracted by the growth of temperance, of medical knowledge, of sanitation, and of general cleanliness. Emigration has increased, the age of marriage has been slightly raised, and a somewhat less proportion of the whole population are married. But, on the other hand, the ratio of births to a marriage has risen, with the result that the population has been growing very nearly steadily. Footnotes on the ratio of births to marriage, but this increase in the figures shown is partly due to improved registration of births. On the steady growth of population, the following tables show the growth of the population of England and Wales in the beginning of the 18th century. The figures before 1801 are computed from the Register of Births and Deaths, and the poll and half tax returns, those since 1801 from census returns. It will be noticed that the numbers increased nearly as much in the 20 years following 1760 as in the preceding 60 years. The pressure of the Great War and the high price of corn is shown in the slow growth between 1790 and 1801, and the effects of indiscriminate poor law allowances, in spite of greater pressure, is shown by the rapid increase in the next 10 years, and the still greater increase when that pressure was removed in the decade ending 1821. The third column shows the percentage which the increase during the preceding decade was of the population at the beginning of that decade. In 1700, the population was 5,475,000. 1710, 5,240,000, a decrease of 4.9%. 1720, 5,565,000, an increase of 6.2%. 1730, 5,796,000, an increase of 4.1%. 1740, 6,064,000, 4.6% increase. In 1750, 6,467,000, an increase of 6.6%. 1760, 6,736,000, an increase of 4.1%. 1770, 7,428,000, a 10.3% increase. 1780, 7,953,000, a 7.1% increase. 1790, 8,675,000, a 9.1% increase. In 1801, 8,892,000, a 2.5% increase. In 1811, 10,164,000, a 14.3% increase. In 1821, 12 million, a an 18.1% increase. In 1831, 13,897,000, a 15.8% increase. 1841, 15,909,000, a 14.5% increase. 1851, 17,928,000, a 12.7% increase. In 1861, 20,066,000, an 11.9% increase. In 1871, 22,712,000, a 13.2% increase. In 1881, 25,974,000, a 14.4% increase. In 1891, 29,002,000, an 11.7% increase. And in 1901, 32,527,000, an 11.7% increase. The great growth of emigration during recent years makes it important to correct the figures for the last 3 decades so as to show the natural increase, viz. That due to the excess of births over deaths. The net emigration from the United Kingdom during the decades 1871 to 81 and 1881 to 91 was 1,480,000 and 1,747,000 respectively. End of footnote. Let us examine the course of recent changes a little more closely. Section 7. Early in this century, when wages were low and wheat was dear, the working classes generally spent more than half their income on bread, and consequently, a rise in the price of wheat diminished marriages very much among them. That is, it diminished very much the number of marriages by bands. But it raised the income of many members of the well-to-do classes, and therefore often increased the number of marriages by license. Since, however, these were but a small part of the whole, the net effect was to lower the marriage rate. Footnote. For instance, representing the price of wheat in shillings and the number of marriages in England and Wales in thousands, we have for 1801 wheat at 119 and marriages at 67. For 1803, wheat at 59 and marriages at 94. For 1805, the numbers are 90 and 80. For 1807, they are 75 and 84. For 1812, they are 126 and 82. For 1815, they are 66 and 100. For 1817, they are 97 and 88. For 1822, they are 45 and 99. End of footnote. But as time went on, the price of wheat fell and wages rose, till now the working classes spend on the average less than a quarter of their incomes on bread, and in consequence the variations of commercial prosperity have got to exercise a preponderating influence on the marriage rate. Footnote. Since 1820, the average price of wheat has seldom exceeded 60 shillings and never 75 shillings, and the successive inflations of commerce, which culminated and broke in 1826, 1836-9, 1848, 1856, 1866, and 1873, exercised an influence on the marriage rate about equal with changes in the price of corn. When the two causes act together, the effects are very striking. Thus, between 1829 and 1834, there was a recovery of prosperity, accompanied by a steady fall in the price of wheat, and marriages rose from 104 to 121,000. The marriage rate rose again rapidly between 1842 and 1845, when the price of wheat was a little lower than in the preceding years, and the business of the country was reviving. And again under similar circumstances between 1847 and 1853, and between 1862 and 1865. A comparison of the marriage rate with the harvests in Sweden for the years 1749 to 1883 is given by Sir Rawson in the Statistical Journal for December 1885. The harvest does not declare itself till part of the year's tale of marriages is made up, and further, the inequalities of harvests are to some extent compensated for by the storage of grain, and therefore the individual harvest figures do not correspond closely with the marriage rate. But when several good or bad harvests come together, the effect in increasing or diminishing the marriage rate is very clearly marked. End of footnote. Since 1873, though the average real income of the population of England has indeed been increasing, its rate of increase has been less than in the preceding years, and meanwhile there has been a continuous fall of prices and consequently a continuous fall in the money incomes of many classes of society. Now people are governed in their calculations as to whether they can afford to marry or not, more by the money income which they expect to be able to get than by elaborate calculations of changes in its purchasing power. And therefore the standard of living among the working classes has been rising rapidly, perhaps more rapidly than at any other time in English history. Their household expenditure measured in money has remained about stationary, and measured in goods has increased very fast. Meanwhile, the price of wheat has also fallen very much, and a marked fall in the marriage rate for the whole country has often accompanied a marked fall in the price of wheat. The marriage rate is now reckoned on the basis that each marriage involves two persons, and should therefore count for two. The English rate fell from 17.6 per thousand in 1873 to 14.2 in 1886. It rose to 16.5 in 1899. In 1907 it was 15.8, but in 1908 only 14.9. Footnote. Statistics of exports are among the most convenient indications of the fluctuations of commercial credit and industrial activity, and in the article already quoted, Ogle has shown a correspondence between the marriage rate and the exports per head. Compare diagrams in Volume 2, page 12 of Levasseur's La Population Française, and with regard to Massachusetts by Wilcox in the Political Science Quarterly, Volume 8, pages 76 to 82. Ogle's inquiries have been extended and corrected in a paper read by R. H. Hooker before the Manchester Statistical Society in January 1898, who points out that if the marriage rate fluctuates, the birth rate during an ascending phase of the marriage rate is apt to correspond to the marriage rate not for that phase, but for the preceding phase when the marriage rate was declining, and vice versa. Hence, the ratio of births to marriages declines when the marriage rate is rising, and rises when the marriage rate falls. A curve representing the ratio of births to marriages will move inversely to the marriage rate. He points out that the decline in the ratio of births to marriages is not great, and is accounted for by the rapid decline of illegitimate births. The ratio of legitimate births to marriages is not declining perceptibly. End of footnote. There is much to be learnt from the history of population in Scotland and in Ireland. In the lowlands of Scotland, a high standard of education, the development of mineral resources, and close contact with their richer English neighbours have combined to afford a great increase of average income to a rapidly increasing population. On the other hand, the inordinate growth of population in Ireland before the potato famine in 1847, and its steady diminution since that time, will remain forever landmarks in economic history. Comparing the habits of different nations, we find that in the Teutonic countries of Central and Northern Europe, the age of marriage is kept late, partly in consequence of the early years of manhood being spent in the army, but that it has been very early in Russia, where, at all events under the old regime, the family group insisted on the son's bringing a wife to help in the work of the household as early as possible, even if he had to leave her for a time and go to earn his living elsewhere. In the United Kingdom and America, there is no compulsory service, and men marry early. In France, contrary to general opinion, early marriages on the part of men are not rare. while on the part of women they are more common than in any country for which we have statistics, except the Slavonic countries, where they are much the highest. Footnote. The preceding statements are based chiefly on statistics arranged by the late Signor Bodiot, by Monsieur Levasseur, La Population Française, and by the English Registrar General in his report for 1907. End of footnote. The marriage rate, the birth rate, and the death rate are diminishing in almost every country, but the general mortality is high where the birth rate is high. For instance, both are high in Slavonic countries, and both are low in the north of Europe. The death rates are low in Australasia, and the natural increase there is fairly high, though the birth rate is low and falling very fast. In fact, its fall in the various states ranged from 23 to 30% in the period 1881 to 1901. Footnote. Much instructive and suggestive matter connected with the subject of this chapter is contained in the statistical memoranda and charts relating to public health and social conditions published by the Local Government Board in 1909. End of footnote. End of chapter 4.
Chapter 5 of Principles of Economics, Book 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Principles of Economics, Book 4, by Alfred Marshall. Chapter 5. The Health and Strength of the Population. We have next to consider the conditions on which depend health and strength, physical, mental, and moral. They are the basis of industrial efficiency, on which the production of material wealth depends, while conversely, the chief importance of material wealth lies in the fact that, when wisely used, it increases the health and strength, physical, mental, and moral of the human race. In many occupations, industrial efficiency requires little else than physical vigor, that is, muscular strength, a good constitution, and energetic habits. In estimating muscular, or indeed any other kind of strength for industrial purposes, we must take account of the number of hours in the day, of the number of days in the year, and the number of years in the lifetime during which it can be exerted. But with this precaution, we can measure a man's muscular exertion by the number of feet through which his work would raise a pound weight, if it were applied directly to this use, or, in other words, by the number of foot-pounds of work that he does. Although the power of sustaining great muscular exertion seems to rest on constitutional strength and other physical conditions, yet even it depends also on force of will and strength of character. Energy of this kind, which may perhaps be taken to be the strength of the man, as distinguished from that of his body, is moral rather than physical, but yet it depends on the physical condition of nervous strength. This strength of the man himself, this resolution, energy, and self-mastery, or in short, this vigor, is the source of all progress. It shows itself in great deeds, in great thoughts, and in the capacity for true religious feeling. Vigor works itself out in so many forms that no simple measure of it is possible. But we are all of us constantly estimating vigor and thinking of one person as having more backbone, more stuff in him, or as being a stronger man than another. Businessmen, even in different trades, and university men, even when engaged in different studies, get to estimate one another's strength very closely. It soon becomes known if less strength is required to get a first class in one study than another. In discussing the growth of numbers, a little has been said incidentally of the causes which determine length of life, but they are in the main the same as those which determine constitutional strength and vigor, and they will occupy our attention again in the present chapter. The first of these causes is the climate. In warm countries we find early marriages and high birth rates, and in consequence a low respect for human life. This has probably been the cause of a great part of the high mortality that is generally attributed to the insalubrity of the climate. Vigor depends partly on race qualities, but these, so far as they can be explained at all, seem to be chiefly due to climate. Climate has also a large share in determining the necessaries of life, the first of which is food. Much depends on the proper preparation of food, and a skilled housewife with 10 shillings a week to spend on food will often do more for the health and strength of her family than an unskilled one with 20. The great mortality of infants among the poor is largely due to the want of care and judgment in preparing their food, and those who do not entirely succumb to this want of motherly care often grow up with enfeebled constitutions. In all ages of the world except the present, want of food has caused wholesale destruction of the people. Even in London in the 17th and 18th centuries, the mortality was 8%, greater in years of dear corn than in years of cheap corn. But gradually, the effects of increased wealth and improved means of communication are making themselves felt nearly all over the world. The severity of famines is mitigated even in such a country as India, and they are unknown in Europe and in the New World. In England now, want of food is scarcely ever the direct cause of death, but it is a frequent cause of that general weakening of the system which renders it unable to resist disease, and it is a chief cause of industrial inefficiency. We have already seen that the necessaries for efficiency vary with the nature of the work to be done, but we must now examine this subject a little more closely. As regards muscular work in particular, there is a close connection between the supply of food that a man has and his available strength. If the work is intermittent, as that of some dock laborers, a cheap but nutritious grain diet is sufficient. But for very heavy, continuous strain, such as is involved in puddlers and the hardiest navvies' work, food is required which can be digested and assimilated even when the body is tired. This quality is still more essential in the food of the higher grades of labor, whose work involves great nervous strain, though the quantity required by them is generally small. After food, the next necessaries of life and labor are clothing, house room, and firing. When they are deficient, the mind becomes torpid, and ultimately the physical constitution is undermined. When clothing is very scanty, it is generally worn night and day, and the skin is allowed to be enclosed in a crust of dirt. A deficiency of house room or of fuel causes people to live in a vitiated atmosphere, which is injurious to health and vigor, and not the least of the benefits which the English people derive from the cheapness of coal is the habit, peculiar to them, of having well-ventilated rooms even in cold weather. Badly built houses with imperfect drainage cause diseases, which even in their slighter forms weaken vitality in a wonderful way, and overcrowding leads to moral evils, which diminish the numbers and lower the character of the people. Rest is essential for the growth of a vigorous population, as the more material necessaries of food, clothing, etc. Overwork of every form lowers vitality, while anxiety, worry, and excessive mental strain have a fatal influence in undermining the constitution, in impairing fecundity, and diminishing the vigor of the race. Next come three closely allied conditions of vigor, namely, hopefulness, freedom, and change. All history is full of the record of inefficiency caused in varying degrees by slavery, serfdom, and other forms of civil and political oppression and repression. In all ages, colonies have been apt to outstrip their mother countries in vigor and energy. This has been partly due to the abundance of land and the cheapness of necessaries at their command, partly to that natural selection of the strongest characters for a life of adventure, and partly to physiological causes connected with the mixture of races. But perhaps the most important cause of all is to be found in the hope, the freedom, and the changefulness of their lives. Freedom, so far, has been regarded as freedom from external bonds. But that higher freedom, which comes of self-mastery, is an even more important condition for the highest work. The elevation of the ideals of life on which this depends is due on the one side to political and economic causes, and on the other to personal and religious influences, among which the influence of the mother in early childhood is supreme. Bodily and mental health and strength are much influenced by occupation. At the beginning of this century, the conditions of factory work were needlessly unhealthy and oppressive for all, and especially for young children. But Factory and Education Acts have removed the worst of these evils from factories, though many of them still linger about domestic industries and the smaller workshops. The higher wages, the greater intelligence, and the better medical facilities of townspeople should cause infant mortality to be much lower among them than in the country. But it is generally higher, especially where there are many mothers who neglect their family duties in order to earn money wages. In almost all countries, there is a constant migration towards the towns. The large towns, and especially London, absorb the very best blood from all the rest of England. The most enterprising, the most highly gifted, those with the highest physique and the strongest characters go there to find scope for their abilities. An increasing number of those are the most capable and have most strength of character live in suburbs, where excellent systems of drainage, water supply, and lighting, together with good schools and opportunities for open-air play, give conditions at least as conducive to vigor as are to be found in the country. And, though there are still many town districts only a little less injurious to vitality than were large towns generally some time ago, yet on the whole the increasing density of population seems to be for the present a diminishing source of danger. The recent rapid growth of facilities for living far from the chief centers of industry and trade must indeed slacken in time. But there seems no sign of any slackening in the movement of industries outwards to suburbs, and even to new garden cities, to seek and to bring with them vigorous workers. Statistical averages are indeed unduly favorable to urban conditions, partly because many of the town influences which lower vigor do not much affect mortality, and partly because the majority of immigrants into the towns are in the full strength of youth, and of more than average energy and courage, while young people whose parents live in the country generally go home when they become seriously ill. There is no better use for public and private money than in providing public parks and playgrounds in large cities, in contracting with railways to increase the number of the workmen's trains run by them, and in helping those of the working classes who are willing to leave the large towns to do so, and to take their industries with them. And there are yet other causes for anxiety, for there is some partial arrest of that selective influence of struggle and competition which in the earlier stages of civilization caused those who were strongest and most vigorous to leave the largest progeny behind them, and to which, more than any other single cause, the progress of the human race is due. In the later stages of civilization, the rule has indeed long been that the upper classes marry late, and in consequence have fewer children than the working classes. But this has been compensated for by the fact that among the working classes themselves, the old rule was held, and the vigor of the nation, that is tending to be damped out among the upper classes, is thus replenished by the fresh stream of strength that is constantly welling up from below. But in France for a long time, and recently in America and England, some of the abler and more intelligent of the working class population have shown signs of a disinclination to have large families, and this is a source of danger. Thus there are increasing reasons for fearing that while the progress of medical science and sanitation is saving from death a continually increasing number of the children of those who are feeble physically and mentally, many of those who are most thoughtful and best endowed with energy, enterprise, and self-control are tending to defer their marriages and in other ways to limit the number of children whom they leave behind them. The motive is sometimes selfish, and perhaps it is best that hard and frivolous people should leave but few descendants of their own type. But more often it is a desire to secure a good social position for their children. This desire contains many elements that fall short of the highest ideals of human aims, and in some cases a few that are distinctly base. But after all, it has been one of the chief factors of progress, and those who are affected by it include many of those whose children would probably be among the best and strongest of the race. It must be remembered that the members of a large family educate one another. They are usually more genial and bright, often more vigorous in every way than the members of a small family. Partly, no doubt, this is because their parents were of unusual vigor, and for a like reason they in their turn are likely to have large and vigorous families. The progress of the race is due to a much greater extent than appears at first sight to the descendants of a few exceptionally large and vigorous families. But on the other hand, there is no doubt that the parents can often do better in many ways for a small family than a large one. Other things being equal, an increase in the number of children who are born causes an increase of infantile mortality, and that is an unmixed evil. The birth of children who die early from want of care and adequate means is a useless strain to the mother, and an injury to the rest of the family. There are other considerations of which account ought to be taken, but so far as the points discussed in this chapter are concerned, it seems prima facie advisable that people should not bring children into the world till they can see their way to giving them at least as good an education, both physical and mental, as they themselves had, and that it is best to marry moderately early, provided there is sufficient self-control to keep the family within the requisite bounds without transgressing moral laws. The general adoption of these principles of action, combined with an adequate provision of fresh air and of healthy play for our town populations, could hardly fail to cause the strength and vigor of the race to improve. And we shall presently find reasons for believing that, if the strength and vigor of the race improves, the increase of numbers will not for a long time to come cause a diminution of the average real income of the people. Thus, then, the progress of knowledge, and in particular of medical science, the ever-growing activity and wisdom of government in all matters relating to health, and the increase of material wealth, all tend to lessen mortality and to increase health and strength, and to lengthen life. On the other hand, vitality is lowered and the death rate raised by the rapid increase of town life, and by the tendency of the higher strains of the population to marry later and to have fewer children than the lower. If the former set of causes were alone in action, but so regulated as to avoid the danger of overpopulation, it is probable that man would quickly rise to a physical and mental excellence superior to any that the world has yet known, while if the latter set acted unchecked, he would speedily degenerate. As it is, the two sets hold one another very nearly in balance, the former slightly preponderating. While the population of England is growing nearly as fast as ever, those who are out of health in body or mind are certainly not an increasing part of the whole. The rest are much better fed and clothed, and, except in overcrowded industrial districts, are generally growing in strength. The average duration of life, both for men and women, has been increasing steadily for many years. End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of Principles of Economics, Book 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Icy Jumbo. Principles of Economics, Book 4 by Alfred Marshall. Chapter 6, Industrial Training. Section 1. Having discussed the causes which govern the growth of a numerous and vigorous population, we have next to consider the training that is required to develop its industrial efficiency. The natural vigour that enables a man to attain great success in any one pursuit would generally have served him in good stead in almost any other. But there are exceptions. Some people, for instance, seem to be fitted from birth for an artistic career and for no other, and occasionally a man of great practical genius is found to be almost devoid of artistic sensibility. But a race that has great nervous strength seems generally able, under favourable conditions, to develop in the course of a few generations ability of almost any kind that it holds in specially high esteem. A race that has acquired vigour in war or in the ruder forms of industry sometimes gains intellectual and artistic power of a high order very quickly, and nearly every literary and artistic epoch of classical and medieval times has been due to a people of great nervous strength, who have been brought into contact with noble thoughts before they have acquired much taste for artificial comforts and luxuries. The growth of this taste in our own age has prevented us from taking full advantage of the opportunities our largely increased resources give us of consecrating the greater part of the highest abilities of the race to the highest aims. But perhaps the intellectual vigour of the age appears less than it really is, in consequence of the growth of scientific pursuits. For in art and literature Success is often achieved while genius still wears the fascinating aspect of youth. But in modern science, so much knowledge is required for originality that before a student can make his mark in the world, his mind has often lost the first bloom of its freshness. And further, the real value of his work is not often patent to the multitude as that of a picture or poem generally is. Footnote. In this connection, it is worthwhile to notice that the full importance of an epoch-making idea is often not perceived in the generation in which it is made. It starts the thoughts of the world on a new track, but the change of direction is not obvious until the turning point has been left some way behind. In the same way, the mechanical inventions of every age are apt to be underrated relatively to those of earlier times. For a new discovery is seldom fully effective for practical purposes till many minor improvements and subsidiary discoveries have gathered themselves around it. An invention that makes an epoch is very often a generation older than the epoch which it makes. Thus it is that each generation seems to be chiefly occupied in working out the thoughts of the preceding one, while the full importance of its own thoughts is as yet not clearly seen. End of footnote. In the same way, the solid qualities of the modern machine-tending artisan are rated more cheaply than the lighter virtues of the medieval handicraftsman. This is partly because we are apt to regard as commonplace those excellences which are common in our own time, and to overlook the fact that the term unskilled labourer is constantly changing its meaning. Section 2. Very backward races are unable to keep on at any kind of work for a long time, and even the simplest form of what we would regard as unskilled work is skilled work relatively to them. For they have not the requisite assiduity, and they can acquire it only by a long course of training. But where education is universal, an occupation may fairly be classed as unskilled, though it requires a knowledge of reading and writing. Again, in districts in which manufactures have long been domiciled, a habit of responsibility, of carefulness and promptitude in handling expensive machinery and materials becomes the common property of all, and then much of the work of tending machinery is said to be entirely mechanical and unskilled, and to call forth no human faculty that is worthy of esteem. But in fact, it is probable that not 1/10 of the present populations of the world have the mental and moral faculties, the intelligence and the self-control that are required for it. Perhaps not 1/2 could be made to do the work well by steady training for 2 generations. Even of a manufacturing population, only a small part are capable of doing many of the tasks that appear at first sight to be entirely monotonous. Machine weaving, for instance, simple as it seems, is divided into higher and lower grades. And most of those who work in the lower grades have not the stuff in them that is required for weaving with several colours. And the differences are even great in industries that deal with hard materials, wood, metals or ceramics. Some kinds of manual work require long continued practice in one set of operations, but these cases are not very common, and they are becoming rarer, for machinery is constantly taking over work that requires manual skill of this kind. It is indeed true that a general command over the use of one's fingers is a very important element of industrial efficiency, but this is the result chiefly of nervous strength and self-mastery. It is of course developed by training, but the greater part of this may be of a general character and not special to the particular occupation. Just as a good cricketer soon learns to play tennis well, so a skilled artisan can often move into other trades without any great and lasting loss of efficiency. Manual skill that is so specialized that it is quite incapable of being transferred from one occupation to another is becoming steadily a less and less important factor in production. Putting aside for the present the faculties of artistic perception and artistic creation, we may say that what makes one occupation higher than another, what makes the workers of one town or country more efficient than those of another, is chiefly a superiority in general sagacity and energy, which are not specialised to any one occupation. To be able to bear in mind many things at a time, to have everything ready when wanted, to act promptly and show resource when anything goes wrong, to accommodate oneself quickly to changes in detail of the work done, to be steady and trustworthy, to have always a reserve of force which will come out in emergency. These are the qualities which make a great industrial people. They are not peculiar to any occupation, but are wanted in all. And if they cannot always be easily transferred from one trade to other kindred trades, the chief reason is that they require to be supplemented by some knowledge of materials and familiarity with special processes. We may then use the term general ability to denote those faculties and that general knowledge and intelligence which are in varying degrees the common property of all the higher grades of industry, while that manual dexterity and that acquaintance with particular materials and processes which are required for the special purposes of individual trades may be classed as specialised ability. Section 3. General ability depends largely on the surroundings of childhood and youth. In this, the first and far the most powerful influence is that of the mother. Next comes the influence of the father, of other children, and in some cases of servants. Footnotes. For the influence of the mother. According to Galton, the statement that all great men have had great mothers goes too far, but that shows only that the mother's influence does not outweigh all others, not that it is not greater than any one of them. He says that the mother's influence is most easily traceable among theologians and men of science, because an earnest mother leads her child to feel deeply about great things, and a thoughtful mother does not repress, but encourages that childish curiosity which is the raw material of scientific habits of thought. For the other influences, there are many fine natures among domestic servants, but those who live in very rich houses are apt to get self-indulgent habits, to overestimate the importance of wealth, and generally to put the lower aims of life above the higher, in a way that is not common with independent working people. The company in which the children of some of our best houses spend much of their time is less ennobling than that of the average cottage. Yet in these very houses, no servant who is not specially qualified is allowed to take charge of a young retriever or a young horse. End of footnotes. As years pass on, the child of the working man learns a great deal from what he sees and hears going on around him. And when we inquire into the advantages for starting in life which children of the well-to-do classes have over those of artisans, and which these in their turn have over the children of unskilled labourers, we shall have to consider these influences of home in more detail. But at present we may pass to consider the more general influences of school education. Little need be said of general education, though the influence even of that on industrial efficiency is greater than it appears. It is true that the children of the working classes must very often leave school when they have but learnt the elements of reading, writing, arithmetic, and drawing, and it is sometimes argued that part of the little time spent on these subjects would be better given to practical work. But the advance made at school is important, not so much on its own account, as for the power of future advance which a school education gives. For a truly liberal general education adapts the mind to use its best faculties in business, and to use business itself as a means of increasing culture, though it does not concern itself with the details of particular trades. That is left for technical education. Footnote. The absence of a careful general education for the children of the working classes has been hardly less detrimental to industrial progress than the narrow range of the old grammar school education of the middle classes. Till recently, indeed, it was the only one by which the average schoolmaster could induce his pupils to use their minds in anything higher than the absorption of knowledge. It was therefore rightly called liberal, because it was the best that was to be had. But it failed in its aim of familiarizing the citizen with the great thoughts of antiquity. It was generally forgotten as soon as school time was over. and it raised an injurious antagonism between business and culture. Now, however, the advance of knowledge is enabling us to use science and art to supplement the curriculum of the grammar school, and to give to those who can afford it an education that develops their best faculties and starts them on the track of thought which will most stimulate the higher activities of their minds in after life. The time spent on learning to spell is almost wasted. If spelling and pronunciation are brought into harmony in the English language, as in most others, about a year will be added to the effective school education without any additional cost. End of footnote. Section 4. Technical education has, in like manner, raised its aims in recent years. It used to mean little more than imparting that manual dexterity and that elementary knowledge of machinery and processes which an intelligent lad quickly picks up for himself when his work has begun. Though if he has learnt it beforehand, he can perhaps earn a few shillings more at starting than if he had been quite ignorant. But such so-called education does not develop faculties. It rather hinders them from being developed. A lad who has picked up the knowledge for himself has educated himself.
Okay, thank you, Alfred Marshall. More from him in the next big show. Okay, now is the part of the show where we go ahead and close the ritualistic circle. Or what do you do? Or do you open the circle or close it? I don't know. Whenever you're having a seance. Whatever you do. We're sending your ass back to hell, Alfred Marshall. And we will summon you forth in the next podcast. Back to hell with ye. Spirit be gone. Okay. Now, let's talk about a little bit about personal financial planning, shall we? Mutual Omaha is free. Brought to you by the fine folks at Mutual. No, okay, not really, but making transactions in the securities markets. Okay. Darn it. All right, folks. I'm a one-man production crew over here, operating on a shoestring budget, and I'm doing this blog talk radio YouTube simulcast show, all with jerry-rigged electronics. So bear with me here. All right, now we're gonna make this happen though. I gotta get in my Zen zone, into the Zen zone. Making transactions in the market, in the securities market, by Charles Lamson. In many respects, dealing in the securities market almost seems like you are operating in another world. Okay, I've got to break out of my St. Charles mush mouth. White trash, speaking patterns. Get into professional mode. In many respects, dealing in the securities markets almost seems like you are operating in another world. One with all kinds of unusual orders and strange-sounding transactions. Actually, making securities transactions is relatively simple once you understand the basics. In fact, you will probably find it is no more difficult than using a checking account. Indeed, while making money in the market is not all that easy, making transactions is. All right. Okay. We're having a little bit of a rocky start here. But, all right, stockbrokers. Stockbrokers or account executives and financial consultants, as they are also called. Okay, I'm thinking I might have already covered this. I don't know. Let me move on. As they are also called, purchase and sell securities for their customers. Although deeply ingrained in our language, the term stockbroker is somewhat misnomer. Yeah, I did cover this in the last show. Sorry. It happens. It's live radio, folks. Or live YouTubing. Well, I'm not going. Oh, yeah, I got to remember to do that. I've been meaning to go live here. This will actually be recorded on YouTube, but one of these days, yeah, I just keep forgetting to. I'm going to be going live. I plan on going live, so I keep forgetting to hit the live thing. But so one of these days, yeah, I'll look for that on YouTube. Which get my podcasts, my YouTubing. I've been pretty busy with other stuff lately, and so haven't been able to do as much as I like to in the past. But so anyway, I'm not quite sure when I'm going to do the next one, but I've been doing about 1 or 2 a week, something like that. Okay, let's talk about margin trades, buying securities on credit. If you are ready to buy securities, you can do so by putting up your own money or by borrowing some of the money. Buying on margin, as it is called, is a common practice that allows investors to use borrowed money to make security transactions. Margin trading is closely regulated and is carried out under strict margin requirements set by the Federal Reserve Board. These requirements specify the amount of equity an investor must put up when buying stocks, bonds, and other securities. The most recent requirement is 50% for common stock, which means that at least 50% of each dollar must be the investor's own. The remaining 50% may be borrowed. Other securities besides stocks can be margined, and these have their own margin requirements. Treasury bonds, for example, can be purchased with a margin as low as 10%. To make margin purchases, you must open a market account and have a minimum of $2,000 in cash or equity in securities on deposit with your broker. Once you meet these requirements, the brokerage firm will loan you the needed funds and retain the securities purchased as collateral. You can also obtain loans to purchase securities from your commercial bank, but the Fed's margin requirements still apply. To see how margin trading works, assume the margin requirement is 50% and that your brokerage firm charges 9% on margin loans. Brokerage firms usually set the rate on margin loans at 1 to 3 points above prime. If you want to purchase a round lot 100 shares of Engulf and Devour, which is currently trading at $50 per share, you can either make the purchase entirely with your own money or borrow a portion of the purchase price. The cost of the transaction will be $5,000, $50 per share, times $5,000. If you margin, you will put up only $2,500 of your own money. That's 50% times 5,000 shares. And borrow the $2,500 balance. This is done for 2 cases. 1, a $20 per share increase in the stock price to $70 per share. And 2, a $20 per share decrease in the stock price to $30 per share. It is assumed that stock will be held for 1 year and all broker commissions are ignored. The use of margin allows you to increase the return on your investment when stock prices increase. Indeed, one of the major attributes of margin trading is that it allows you to magnify your returns. That is, you can use margin to reduce your equity in an investment and thereby magnify the returns from invested capital when security prices go up. The return on your investment when the stock price increases from $50 to $70 a share is 40% without margin and 71% with margin. However, when the stock price declines from $50 to $30 per share, the return on your investment will be a negative 40% without margin and a whopping 89% loss with margin. Clearly, the use of margin magnifies losses as well as profits. If the price of our stock in the example continues to drop, you will eventually reach the point at which your equity in the investment will be so low that the brokerage house will require either to provide more collateral or liquidate the investment. The risk inherent in buying on margin make it imperative that you thoroughly acquaint yourself with the risk-return trade-offs involved before using margin in your investment program. Short selling. The practice of selling borrowed securities. Most security transactions are long transactions. They are made in anticipation of increasing security prices in order to profit by buying low and selling high. A short sale transaction, in contrast, is made in anticipation of a decline in the price of a security. Although not nearly as common as long transactions, short selling is often done by more sophisticated investors as a way to profit during a period of declining prices. When used by individual investors, most short sales are made with common stocks. When an investor sells a security short, the broker borrows the security and then sells it on behalf of the short seller's account. Short sellers actually sell securities they do not own. The borrowed shares must, of course, be replaced in the future. If the investor could purchase could purchase the shares at a lower price, a profit will result. In effect, the objective of a short sell is to take advantage of a drop in price by first selling high and then buying low. Short selling is perfectly legitimate. There's nothing illegal or unethical about it. Indeed, because the shares sold are borrowed securities, numerous rules and regulations protect the party that lends the securities and govern the short sale process. Once regulation, for example, permits stocks to be sold short only when the last change in the market price of the stock has been upward. Another safeguard is the requirement that all proceeds from the borrowed securities be held by the brokerage firm. In short, the short seller never sees any of this money. In addition, the short seller must deposit with the broker a certain amount of money, equivalent to the prevailing initial requirement when the transaction is executed. So even a short sale transaction involves an investment of capital. So, coming up, a short sale transaction can be illustrated with a simple example, one that ignores brokerage fees. Okay, assume that Patrick O'Sullivan wishes to sell short 100 shares of Advanced Buggy Whips, Incorporated, at $52.50 per share. After Pat has met the necessary requirements, including making a margin deposit of $52.50 times 100 times 50%, equaling $2,625, his broker borrows the shares and sells them, obtaining proceeds to $5,250, which is 1,000 shares times 52.50 a share, $52.50 a share. If the stock price goes down as Pat expects, he will be able to repurchase the shares at the lower price. Now, suppose the price drops to $40 per share and he repurchases the shares at the lower price. Now, suppose the price drops to $40 per share and he repurchases the 100 shares. Pat will make a profit because he will have been able to replace the shares for $4,000. That's 100 shares times $40 per share. And he repurchases the 100 shares. Pat will make a profit because he will have been able to replace the shares for $4,000 times $40 per share. That's $4,000 times $40 per share, which is below the $5,250 received when he sold the stock. His profit will be $1,250. That's $5,250 minus $4,000. If, on the other hand, the stock price rose to, say, $60 per share, and Pat repurchased the stocks at that price, he should sustain a loss of $750. Because of the high risk involved in short sales, you should thoroughly familiarize yourself with this technique and all of its pitfalls before attempting to short sell any security. Oh, okay. Moving on. Market data. Usually presented in the form of averages or indexes. Market data describe the general behavior of the securities markets. The averages and indexes are based on the price movements of a select group of securities over an extended period of time. They are used to capture the overall performance of the market as a whole. You would want to follow one or more of these measures to get a feel for how the market is doing over time, and perhaps an indication of what lies ahead. The absolute level of the index at a given point in time for the OTC market, these measures are all intended to keep track of behavior in the stock market, particularly stocks on the New York Stock Exchange, the Dow, S&P, and New York Stock Exchange averages all follow stocks on the big board. In addition, several averages and indexes follow the action in other markets, including the bond, commodities, and options markets for mutual funds, real estate, and collectibles. However, because all those other averages and indexes are not followed nearly as much as those of stocks, we will concentrate here on stock market performance measures. Measures. I promise we will. I'm not just jerking you around here. Okay, so the Dow Jones averages. Ahem. So, the granddaddy of them all, and probably the most widely followed measure of stock market performance, is the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the DJIA. Actually, the Dow Jones averages, which began in 1896, are made up of four parts. One, an individual average based on 30 stocks. Two, a transportation average based on 20 stocks. Three, a utility average based on 15 stocks. And four, a composite average based on all 65 industrial, transportation, and utility stocks. The makeup of the 30 stocks in the DJIA does change a bit over time as companies go private, are acquired by other firms, or become less of a force in the marketplace. Most of the stocks are picked from the NYSE, the New York Stock Exchange, but there are a few NASDAQ shares in there as well, such as Intel and Microsoft. Although these stocks are intended to represent a cross-section of companies, there is a strong bias toward blue chips, which is one of the major criticisms of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Critics also claim that an average made up of only 30 blue chip stocks out of some 5,000 or 6,000 issues is hardly a representative of the market. However, the facts show that as a rule, the behavior of the Dow Jones Industrial Average closely reflects that of other broadly based stock market measures, with the possible exception of the NASDAQ. Okay, Exhibit 1, yada, yada, yada. Okay, this brings us to Standard & Poor's. The Standard & Poor's indexes. Got to stay hydrated, ladies and gentlemen. Non-fluoridated water. Be good to that pineal gland. And it'll be good to you. It is the seat of God consciousness. That's right. Standard & Poor's indexes. Okay. Standard & Poor's S&P indexes are similar to the Dow Jones averages to the extent that they both are used to capture the overall performance of the market. However, some important differences exist between the two measures. For one thing, the S&P uses a lot more stocks. The popular S&P 500 composite index is based on 500 different stocks, whereas the Dow Jones Industrial Average uses only 30 stocks. What's more, the S&P index is made up of all large New York Stock Exchange stocks, as well as some major Amex and OTC stocks. So there's not only more issues in the S&P sample, but also a greater breadth of representation. And finally, there are some technical differences in the mathematical procedures used to compute the two measures. The Dow Jones is an average, whereas the S&P is an index. Yet in spite of these minor differences, movements in these two measures are in fact very highly coordinated, and as a result, they are used in much the same way. There are 8 basic S&P indexes. 1. An industrial index based on 400 stocks. 2. A transportation index of 20 stocks. 3. A public utility index of 40 stocks. 5, a composite index for all 500 of the stocks used in the first 4 indexes. 6, the mid-cap 400. 7, the small cap 600. And 8, the composite S&P 1500, made up of the S&P 500, 400, and 600 indexes. The mid-cap index is made up of 400 medium-sized companies, those with market values that, for the most part, range from about $500 million to $3 billion or more, while the small-cap index consists of small companies with market caps of around $500 million or less. The New York Stock Exchange, the Amex, and the NASDAQ indexes. The most widely followed exchange-based indexes are those of the New York Stock Exchange, the NYSE, the American Stock Exchange, or Amex as it's known, and the NASDAQ. The New York Stock Exchange Index includes all the stocks listed on the big board. In addition to the composite index, the New York Stock Exchange publishes indexes for industrials, utilities, transportation, and finance subgroups. The behavior of the New York Stock Exchange Industrial Index closely mimics that of the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500. The Amex Index reflects share prices on the American Stock Exchange. Made up of all the stocks on the Amex, it is set up in such a way that it directly captures the actual percentage change in the share prices. For example, if the price change in Amex stocks from one day to the next were 3%, the Amex index would likewise increase by 3% over the previous day's values. Like the New York Stock Exchange indexes, the Amex index is often cited in the financial news. Activity in the OTC market is captured by the NASDAQ indexes, which are calculated like the S&P and the New York Stock Exchange indexes. The most comprehensive of these indexes is the NASDAQ Composite Index, which is calculated using virtually all the stocks traded on the NASDAQ system. The other NASDAQ indexes are the industrial, insurance, bank, computers, and telecommunications indexes. In addition, there is the NASDAQ 100 index, which tracks the price behavior of the biggest 100 non-financial firms traded on the NASDAQ. Companies like Microsoft, Intel, Oracle, Cisco, Staples, and Dell. The NASDAQ composite is often used today as a benchmark in assessing the price behavior of high-tech stocks. The index is far more volatile than either the Dow or the S&P, and way outperformed other market measures from 1995 to 1999, before taking a big dive in 2000, 2001, and 2002. All right, moving on. Brokerage reports, advisory services, and investment advisors. The reports produced by the research staffs of the major full-service brokerage firms provide yet another important source of investor information. These reports cover a wide variety of topics, from economic and market analyses to industry and company reports, news of special situations, and reports on interest rates and the bond market. Reports on certain industries or securities prepared by the house's back office research staff may be issued on a regular basis and contains lists of securities within certain industries, classified as to the type of market behavior they are expected to exhibit. Brokerage houses also regularly issue reports prepared by their security analysts on specific securities, which include, among other things, their recommendations as to the type of investment returns expected and whether to buy, hold, or sell the securities in question. Advisory services. A number of subscription advisory services available both in print and online provide information and recommendations on various industries and specific securities. The services normally cost from $50 to several $100 a year. Although these costs may be tax deductible, only the most active investors will find them worthwhile, because you can usually review such materials for free at your broker's office, at universities and public libraries, or online. Probably the best known financial services are those provided by Standard & Poor's, Moody's Investor Service, and Value Line Investment Survey. Each offers an array of services. Standard & Poor's publishes a monthly stock guide and bond guide, each of which summarizes the financial conditions of a few thousand issues. Moody's also publishes stock and bond guides, and a number of reports are also prepared weekly, like Standard & Poor's Outlook. I'd just like to point out, hey, if you want to call in, be a part of the big show, still got about a half hour left, and the caller lines are wide open. That number is 657-383-1825, 657-383-1825. Give us a call and be a part of the big show. Let your voice be heard. Recommended lists of securities broken down into groups on the basis of investment objectives constitute still another type of service. In addition to the popular subscription services, numerous investment letters, which periodically advise advisors on the purchase and sale of securities, are available. Finally, by subscribing to weekly chart books, investors may also obtain graphs showing stock prices and value over extended periods of time. Okay, what we got here? Investment advisors. Successful investors often establish themselves as professional investment advisors. In this capacity, they attempt to develop investment plans consistent with the financial objectives of their clients. You can obtain the services of a professional money manager in several ways. Number one, you can hire an independent investment advisor, but they're usually pretty expensive and prefer to deal with well-heeled clients. Two, you can go to the trust department of a major bank. Many offer their investment services to the general public at very reasonable costs, and you do not have to die or have a trust account to obtain such services. All you have to do is enter into a simple agency agreement. Three, if you deal with a full-service brokerage firm, you can check with your broker to see if they offer fee-based wrap accounts. In these portfolio management accounts, your brokerage firm takes over the full-time management of your investments in return for a flat annual fee. But watch out, that annual fee can get pretty hefty. Or four, you might consider the services of a financial planner. preferably a fee-based planner who has a strong track record in the field of investments. All right, financial road sign. Let the buyer beware. Okay, for better or worse, analysts' reports are widely used by investors. Most of them provide investors with valuable insights, but some are really bad. In particular, be aware of an analyst who insists that a company that has struggled for years will have a bright future, or downplays bad news, or shrugs it off when a major customer leaves a company, or declares the cost to launch a new product will be low, or gives instant approval of a merger, or claims a company is unaffected by the economy, or insists the departure of a top executive won't hurt the company. If you hear an investor saying these things, run for the hills, mofo. If you are thinking of using a professional money manager, the best thing to do is shop around. Look at the kinds of returns he or she has been able to generate in good markets and bad. And do not overlook the matter of cost. Oh, I think I gotta clean that camera off. Just noticed, but it's looking pretty cloudy. Sorry about that. Get around to that next show, but it's got a very hazy look to it. It's got the hazy, dreamy Oprah Winfrey look to it, but really it's just a dirty lens. I think it's an old Hollywood trick to put a little Vaseline on the camera. Make everything look a little fuzzy. Anyway, I know all the tricks, ladies and gentlemen. Or trickster. Okay, if you were thinking of using, a professional manager is equally important. Okay, so gotta shop around. Look at the kinds of returns the person has been able to generate, good markets and bad. Do not overlook the matter of cost. Find out how much up front you'll have to pay and what the fee is based on. Annual fees for advisory services, which may involve the complete management of the client's money, are likely to range from about 1% to as much as 2 or 3% of assets under management. Oh, can't tell. Management. Equally important, find out if the advisor has a specialty. And if so, make sure it is compatible with your investment objectives. Moving on. Moving on from town to town. I'm alone on my own. Other online investor services. And that road goes on and on into the sunset. Mm-hmm. Destiny is bound to moving on. Online investor services. The internet offers a full array of online investor services, from up-to-the-minute stock quotes and research reports to charting services and portfolio tracking. When it comes to investing, you name it, and you can probably find it online. Unfortunately, although many of these are truly high-quality sites that offer valuable information, many others are pure garbage. So you have to use care when entering the world of online investing. But even if you confine yourself to the quality sites, the fact is all this information can be overwhelming and even intimidating. It takes time and effort to use the net wisely. Let's take some time here to review the kinds of investor services you could find online, starting with investor education sites. Investor education. Okay. The internet offers a wide array of tutorials, online classes, and articles to educate the novice investor. Even experienced investors will find sites that expand their investing knowledge. Although most good investment-oriented websites include many educational resources, here are a few good sites that feature investment fundamentals. Okay, you got the Motley Fool, Fool.com. Fool School has sections on fundamentals of investing, mutual fund investing, choosing a broker, investment strategies and styles, lively discussion boards, and more. Get breaking finance news and the latest business articles from AOL at aol.com/finance. Zacks Investment Research, Zacks.com. A free site from the Wall Street Journal is an excellent starting place to learn what the internet can offer investors. NASDAQ, NASDAQ.com, has an investor resource section that helps with financial planning and choosing a broker. Other good educational sites include leading personal finance magazines like Money.com, Kiplinger's personal finance magazine, Kiplinger.com, and Smart Money, SmartMoney.com. Investment tools. Once you are familiar with the basics of investing, you can use the internet to develop financial plans and set investment goals. Find securities that meet your investment objectives, analyze potential investments, and organize your portfolio. Many of these tools, once used only by professional money managers, are free to anyone who wants to go online. You will find financial calculators and worksheets, screening and charting tools, and portfolio trackers at the websites of large brokerage firms, as well as other financial sites. You can even set up a personal calendar that notifies you of forthcoming earnings and announcements and receive alerts when one of your stocks has hit a predetermined price target. Okay, investment planning. Online calculators and worksheets can help you find answers to your financial planning and investing questions. With them, you can figure out how much to save each month for a particular goal, such as the down payment for your first home, a college education for your children, or to be able to retire by the time you reach 55. For example, Fidelity.com, has a wide selection of planning tools that deal with such topics as investment growth, college planning, and retirement planning. One of the best sites for financial calculators is FinanceCenter.com. That's FinanceCenter.com. It includes over 100 calculators for financial planning, insurance, auto and home buying, and investing, investment research and screening. One of the best investor services offered online is the ability to conduct in-depth research on stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and other types of investment vehicles. Go to a site like Quicken.com or Kiplinger.com, click on the Investments tab, and you can obtain literally dozens of pages of financial and market information about a specific stock or mutual fund. For example, you can find historical and forecasted information about a firm's earnings, earnings per share, dividend yields, growth rates, and more in both tabular and graphic formats. You can also track the behavior of a specific stock relative to a market index or to one or more of its major competitors. And many of these sites have links back to the company itself. So, with a couple clicks of the mouse, you can obtain the company's annual report, detailed financial statements, and historical summaries of a full array of financial and market ratios. Moreover, you will find sites that offer detailed reports produced by major brokerage firms, some of which require a nominal charge. In addition to the types of research information described above, investors can also use various online screening tools to identify attractive and potentially rewarding investment vehicles. Most major sites like Quicken, Morningstar, or MSN Money, Central, or other screening tools. Basically, these tools enable you to quickly sort through huge databases of stocks and mutual funds to find those that meet specific characteristics, such as high dividend yields or specific revenue growth. For mutual funds, you might specify a certain type of fund, particular industry or geographical sector, and low fees. Each screening tool uses a different method to sort. You answer a series of questions to specify the type of stock or fund you are looking for. Performance, criteria you desire, cost parameters, and so on. The screen then provides a list of stocks or funds that have met the standards you have met. You can then do more research as described above on the listed stocks or mutual funds to decide which ones you want to further pursue. Portfolio tracking. Almost every investment-oriented website includes portfolio tracking tools. Simply enter the number of shares held and the symbol for those stocks or mutual funds you wish to follow, and the tracker automatically updates the value of your portfolio every time you check. You can usually link to more detailed information about each stock or mutual fund. The features, quality, and ease of use of stock trackers varies, so check several to find the one that meets your needs. Day trading. Okay, as discussed before, trading stocks and other securities online has become very popular among investors, if for no other reason than the rock bottom cost of executing such trades. Face it, it is an easy, convenient, and low-cost way of trading securities. But for some investors, the attraction of trading stocks online is so compelling that they become day traders. The opposite of buy and hold investors with a long-term perspective, day traders buy and sell stocks quickly throughout the day. They hope their stocks will continue to rise in value for the very short time they own them, sometimes just seconds or minutes, so they can make quick profits. True day traders do not own any stocks overnight, hence the term day trader, because they believe the chance of prices changing radically overnight from close on one day to the open on the next can lead to large losses. While day trading is not illegal or unethical, it is highly risky. To compound their risk, day traders usually buy on margin to earn even higher returns. But as we have seen, margin trading also increases the risk of larger losses. Day traders typically incur major financial losses when they start trading. Some never reach profitability. Day traders also have high expenses for brokerage commissions, training, and computer equipment. By some estimates, they must make a 50 to 60% profit just to break even on fees and commissions. So it's best to just stay away. By golly. Oh, shoot. Well, heck. All right, moving on. Okay, some key measures of performance. Professional money managers and seasoned investors use a variety of financial ratios and measures when making common stock investment decisions. They look at such things as dividend yield, book value, return on equity, earnings per share, and price earning multiples to get a feel for the investment merits of a particular stock. In short, they use these and other ratios to help them decide whether to invest in a particular stock. Fortunately, most of the widely followed ratios can be found in published reports, so you do not have to compute them yourself. Even so, if you are thinking about buying a stock or already have a position in common stock, there are a few measures of performance you will want to keep track of. These would include book value or book value per share, not profit margin, return on equity, earnings per share, net profit margin, price earnings ratio, and beta. Okay, you got book value. The amount of stockholders' equity in a firm is measured by book value. This accounting measure is determined by subtracting the firm's liabilities and preferred stocks from the value of its assets. Book value indicates the amount of stockholder funds used to finance the firm. For example, assume rose-colored glasses, RCG, had assets of $5 million, liabilities of $2 million, and preferred stock valued at $1 million. The book value of the firm's common stock would be $2 million. That's $5 million minus $2 million minus $1 million. If the book value is divided by the number of shares outstanding, the result is book value per share. If RCG had 100,000 of common stock outstanding, its book value per share would be $20. That's $2 million divided by 100,000 shares. Because of the positive impact it can have on the growth of the firm, you would like to see book value per share steadily increasing over time. Also, look for stocks whose market prices are comfortably above their book values. Net profit margin. As the yardstick of profitability, net profit margin is one of the most widely followed measures of corporate performance. Basically, this ratio relates the net profits of the firm to its sales, providing an indication of how well the company is controlling its cost structure. The higher the net profit margin, the more money the company earns. Look for a relatively stable or even better an increasing net profit margin. Return on equity. Another very important and widely followed measure, return on equity, or ROE for short, reflects the overall profitability of the firm. It captures in a single ratio the amount of success the firm is having in managing its assets, operations, and capital structure. Return on equity is important because it has a direct and significant impact on the profits, growth, and dividends of the firm. The better the ROE, the better the financial condition and competitive position of the company. Look for a stable or increasing ROE and watch out for a falling ROE, as that could spell trouble. Earnings per share. With stocks, the firm's annual earnings are usually measured and reported in terms of earnings per share, EPS. Basically, EPS translates total corporate profits into profits on a per share basis and provides a convenient measure of the amount of earnings available to stockholders. Earnings per share is found by using the following simple formula. Okay, can't really, well, I don't know. It's not going to really translate very well over the radio, so I can't really put it on the YouTube right now, so screw it. Let's just put it this way. If RCG reported a net profit of $350,000, paid $100,000 in dividends to preferred stockholders, and had 100,000 shares of common outstanding, it would have an EPS of $2.50. That being $350,000 minus $100,000 divided by 100,000. Note that preferred dividends are subtracted from profits because they have to be paid before any monies can be made available to common. Earnings per share are closely followed by stockholders because it represents the amount the firm has earned on behalf of each outstanding share of common stock. Here too, look for a steady rate of growth in EPS. All right, well, it's the end of the big show. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and you'll definitely want to just keep an eye out for the next podcast. Not sure when it's going to be, but yeah, we're going to go ahead and summon the spirit of Alfred Marshall. He's going to talk about principles of economics, and then we're going to come back in the second half and talk some more about personal financial planning. So you won't want to miss that. So keep an eye out for it. And